Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. And this is the Get Literate podcast. On this podcast, we explore the power of leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to make our lives better. And no matter what better means to you, the pages inside books and notebooks can help us get there. So, each week, we'll mix together books, notebooks, mindful practices, and creativity to cultivate a life we love. Now, grab a notebook and your TBR list, and let's get literate. Hey everyone, Stephanie here. Welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I am back in your podcast platform this week with an extra episode, and it's an extra special one because I get to sit down with an author that I admire. Today, I'm talking with JD Spero on the power of hyper-local books. Now, I didn't realize how much I needed or wanted this kind of book in my reading life until fairly recently. I was reading A Wish for Winter by Viola Shipman with my Get Literate Patreon community, and I absolutely loved the strong sense of place that the story had. I could visualize Michigan. I could see the water. I could see the ice and the snow and the streets, the stores, all of it. What surprised me was how real that setting was, and I was quite jealous of my Michigan friends who had a different perspective because they could literally see and live and experience the setting in a way that I couldn't. So it got me thinking about hyperlocal books, or books that are actually set in a real life location and have real life references to real life streets, stores, and attractions. It just invites the reader into a book in a way that others can't. So when I think about hyperlocal books that touched me, and the ones that really made me appreciate having this kind of genre in my reading life, I instantly thought of JD Spero. She has written 4 books. Well, she's actually written more than 4, but 4 books that I have read that all take place fairly close to my actual hometown. One of them took place where my husband actually grew up. Another took place just a few miles north of where I am in the beautiful Adirondacks. And yes, there were some Boston settings as well, but I had been there. I'd experienced it, so I could still bring that same hyperlocal essence to that aspect of the book too. It just does something. When you can read a book and not just imagine it in your head, but you can literally walk down that street, or you know that you've been there, or you know that store, you've walked in that restaurant that's referenced. It just makes you live the book a different way. So I wanted to bring JD on to talk to her about her books, to introduce you to hopefully a new author and a whole stack of books that you can add to your TBR. And I wanted to get the inside scoop about writing hyperlocal books from her perspective. And that's what we do. We talk about all the things, her backstory and how she came to be a writer. We talk about her books, the ones that are hyperlocal for me and those that are not. And then we talk about the process of writing, what it means to write hyperlocal books and how you prepare and how you get it right. It was a wonderful conversation, one that I wish could have went on and on and on, and I'm pretty sure she'll be back on the podcast when her latest books are published so we can continue the conversation. So without further ado, here's my conversation with JD Spero. JD Spero, welcome to the Get Literate podcast. I am so excited to talk with you today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So I was super excited for this session today for a couple of reasons. First, I always feel like a kid on Christmas morning when I get to talk to an author, especially an author that I loved. I'm 5 books in and I'm in love with all of them. So I am really excited just to kind of fangirl a little bit on the book today. But what I love that you have helped me realize over the course of reading your books is that I something I didn't know about myself as a reader and something that I didn't know I wanted, which was the ability to really feel like I was living inside of the books because your books are local to me. They are set in local places with some real local references. And I didn't know how much that would heighten the reading experience as it has. So hyperlocal books are kind of my new obsession. And so I'm really excited to talk with you about that today from your perspective. I have my perspective of
Yeah,
reading them, but your perspective of writing them, which should be a
yeah,
fun conversation.
definitely.
So for those where hyper local books might be a new term, I just want to preface it by saying that term is usually defined as a book that has a really strong sense of place. But beyond that, it's got a really strong sense of real places. So the books are set in real life settings with real life mention of real life places. Not that all of them must be real, but are there's some degree of truth in them in the location that they're set. So if you are a reader who's not from the area, you just feel this really great strong sense of place. But if you are a reader that is from the area, you feel like you're there. You feel like you're living it. I know
Yeah,
that road. I know that
yeah,
store. When I was reading about,
yeah,
I know that Price Chopper. I know the Speed Manor.
yeah,
Um, so you do that so well in your books, at least the four in particular that I am thinking about. And I think readers will get a kick out of, even if they don't live where we live and don't quite know these terms, I'm sure that they can apply this kind of hyper-local thinking to their own area and hopefully enhance their experience as readers as well. Now
yeah.
I've spoken too much, so I'm going to throw it back. Let's
Okay.
let's tell readers your backstory. Tell us all the things, who you are, how you came to be a writer with this beautiful stack of books on my desk, and what you're.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, I've always loved to write. I've always been a writer, but I never wrote seriously until I was in my 20s. I worked in corporate America out of college. Although I was an English major and I used, I wrote as a hobby. It wasn't until I had, something really juicy to write about that I thought I wanted to take a shot at writing a novel. And my first book was based on my experience doing a website design company startup in Boston, which was, part of that web boom that happened that, everyone thought they were going to make millions of dollars. And I wrote this book and I called it Giddy Up Startup. And it's a terrible book. It's not published. It will never be published. It's on those floppy disks. But the process of writing it was so cathartic and just
Yeah.
I loved the process and I was hooked. And from that moment, I just started writing these novels. And I wrote a few before I actually published any. I think I wrote at least three before I published my first. And I published my first at 41. So there was a, big time span. And in that time, I got married. I had three kids. There was a lot going on. I ended up changing careers, becoming a teacher. I was a teacher of high school English. And so I was writing in the summertime, but I wasn't, publishing anything. And of course, my job and my kids were my focus. And then my husband's job we were living in the Boston area. His job took us to, the Midwest and then to Texas. So we lived in all these other places. And, I had small kids and I just kind of took a break from working, like, a 9 to 5 job. And I just started focusing on writing. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to make a go at this. I'm going to make this my job. And it was a great thing to have as a mom of young kids, because as a lot of moms probably struggle with, when kids are little, you have a lot of brain time that's feeling empty. You need to like have some sort of stimulation. And so that really filled a need for me, like when the kids were young. And by that time, by the time I think my youngest was 4 when I published my first, and then it just kind of took off from there. So it's been a wild ride, and it's been awesome. and I
I
love
love it.
it.
I especially love, like really, really love, and I know many members of the community listening will love that you didn't publish your first book until 41.
Yeah. Hmm.
So there is
Yeah.
hope for all of us,
Yeah.
just dreams
Yeah.
dancing in there. That I didn't
Yeah. And the
realize
fact that
that.
I wrote three full novels before I published any. And there's one that I keep going back to, and I've tried to rewrite it like several times. I might go back to that, and it might end up, a version of it might end up in the world someday. But for the most part, that was kind of my training. I don't have an MFA, but I feel like I have worked, kind of, with the boots on the ground kind of MFA with just trying to figure it out. I've done a lot of online workshops about how to, hone my craft, and that's been really helpful. But I really just reading and writing, and just to keep doing it. You can't help but get better. So
Right.
I feel like that's been, just being dedicated to that has been, kind of a success story by, alone.
Oh, and very inspiring on this side of the screen. Very inspiring.
Yeah.
I love hearing the backstories, because most of us who love reading, who love writing, who are educators, a lot of us do have that little dream in the back of our head to
Sure.
someday write a book.
Yeah.
I could do that. And so many of us push that aside because, oh, we're too old, or we didn't get the degree, or X, Y, or
Yeah.
Z, right? Fill in the blank. And I've got a stack of your books here, and you didn't let any of that stop you. And like you said, the novels along the way, you just loved it, and you did it out of
Hmm.
the love, and then that went somewhere. So that
Hmm.
that is an unexpected, inspiring nugget that I'm getting out
Yeah.
today. So thank you for that.
Yeah. It's funny.
Now,
My husband will tell me, like, if I start to get a little anxious about things, life in general, he'll be like, "You need to go write. Why don't you go write somewhere?" It's like something I have to do, you know?
it's therapy. Our
So
notebooks are
yeah.
therapy. Yes, many of
Yes.
us can relate. So now, how did you go from Texas and the Midwest to upstate New York, which is
Well,
where the book
actually, yeah,
is set, I know.
right. I grew up here. I grew up in upstate New
Oh, okay.
York. I was a graduate from Lake George High School, but I went to college in the Boston area, and that's where I met my husband. I spent my 20s and 30s, most of my 30s, in the Boston area, and then we when we started moving around, we kind of always thought we would be back in the Boston area, and um, it was just kind of, by chance that we ended up back here. And then my boys started at the school. They got involved in the school system, and we didn't want to pull them out. And
Yeah,
we just loved it. My husband loved it, which is more important because I'm from here. He's
right,
the Boston
right.
kid, and for him to fall in love with this area, it was
Yeah,
cool. But I never thought I'd be living in my hometown.
right.
But here I am, and
Here
it's
you
great.
are. Here you
It's
are. It's
great.
all good. And
Hmm.
Boston is just a drive away,
It is. It is. Yeah. So.
so let's talk about all the books. So
Hmm.
I've got, and I know people can't see me, but if they could, I've got a stack. I've got 4 of your
I
books.
have them here too.
Yeah, I've got the same stacks right in my hands. The fifth
Uh-huh.
book that I'm reading is currently living on my Kindle. When I first started kind of diving into your list of books, I first started with Forte and Concerto. And
Hmm.
the reason I did really was by chance. And I'm so thankful for that chance. My husband was Christmas shopping for me at a local bookstore.
Hmm. I
And
remember this.
you
Yeah,
do?
I do. Yes.
You were there signing books. And not only does he know that, I'm always up for a new author, a new book, but when the book is signed, it's just super special. And
Hmm.
at least the first book primarily takes place in his hometown. And so
Right.
that was the kicker that sealed the deal. And
Right.
really the first series I had read where I could connect with the setting
Hmm.
so much, in a way
Hmm.
that I hadn't before. So could you give readers a quick little overview of what that 2-book series is about?
Sure. So the Forte series is a an urban fantasy, which is, it's a fantasy, has a taste of magic in it, but it's set in a real world setting. And that's the only kind of fantasy book I could ever write because, I'm not a world builder, that would be too far out for me. But I wanted to set it in a real place that could, people could connect to, and that some place that I was familiar with. And so I chose to set it in a small town, upstate New York, for those listeners who aren't familiar, called Whitehall. And I used its historic name, Skenesboro, in the book because I think it sounds cooler. And the reason I chose that, and the book is, about a teenage girl who is, struggling between sports and the arts, and she ends up with this like magic potion that makes her really good at sports, and that kind of hurts her musical ability. So I don't want to spoil the rest of the story for anyone, but I kind of based it on my life and as a teenager, going into to a small school in Lake George, where you kind of had to do both or you could do both because it was so small. They needed people in both things. So but I wasn't really good at either, or I wasn't really good at the sports part. So there's a scene in the beginning where she's trying to play volleyball and she's terrible. And that was absolutely me. and the coach in the book, who I don't know if you read the back, but she's a very famous coach in the area, who was my coach, back in high school. Her nickname is Panic. So, and people would say, are you going to play for Panic? And I actually, that was the initial name of the book, Play for Panic.
Oh.
So I changed the name of Panic, and I, changed her character completely because she does kind of become a villain. And I have too much respect for my high school coach for that. But the reason I chose to set it in Whitehall and not Lake George is because I felt like there needed to be a little distance from my personal experience, and what I'm putting on the page. And I feel like a lot of writers need to do that sometimes. Otherwise it might, spill into maybe too much of the autobiographical stuff. And, every author will put in, little snippets of his or her life, but you do need a little bit of distance just to be able to push it a little bit. And kind of be a little bit more vulnerable without feeling like you're completely exposed. And the reason Whitehall was such an attractive town for me is because, I told you, we lived in the Boston area. We lived in northern Boston, so northern Massachusetts. And we would drive to get here. We would drive through New Hampshire and Vermont. And as you probably know, you have to go through Whitehall in order to get to Lake George if you go that route on Route 4. And so we would always go through Whitehall. And of course, I would always look up and see Skene Manor. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was just such a cool, beautiful Victorian mansion in the middle of like nowhere. And it was just held all this mystery and then the canal running through the town, and how, I knew that historically it had been a thriving town. And now it was just kind of, sadly a little bit, dead. And, I was like, what's going on here? And another thing I have to tell you, I have to share this, because we were years ago when we were getting married. We lived in Boston, but we were getting married here, and we could not get here to get our marriage license because we couldn't take time off work, or, whatever the reason was. So I called the town hall in Whitehall and I said, listen, we're going to be driving through at 8:00 at night on a Friday. Can someone meet us and give us our marriage license? And they did. They did. That's a small town, yeah, sure. Just give me a call. I live right down the street. I'll walk over. And, she came over, and we of course we were like taking pictures, and she probably didn't expect that. But so I just felt this like, warm place in my heart for the town. Like, oh my gosh, what a great, great people. And, so I decided to set it there, and I loved being able to use that beautiful mansion, Skene Manor, as it actually becomes a character in the book. So it really does, come to life. So I did a lot of tours. I did a lot of, I spent a lot of time just walking around and, probably looking like some strange tourist because it was in the off season. But yeah, so I think it came out, I think it worked. It worked for the story for sure.
Oh, it definitely worked. And as you mentioned earlier, you were saying you wouldn't be able to write a completely fantasy kind of book and create new worlds. I am not a fantasy reader. I do not
Mm,
gravitate towards fantasy books as well. I need to
right.
have my feet squarely in
Yes.
reality. And at first, I was a little hesitant to read
Yeah.
because I know myself as a reader. But even though there certainly is a fantasy element, this book is firmly in reality, right? There are
Yes.
lessons that we can
Right.
all take from it. And it was after reading these two that I thought, okay, well, maybe I don't mind fantasy
Yeah.
after all, because the elements were so shockingly fun and interesting
Yeah.
to me, especially when we get into book two, when lots of things start to happen.
Hmm.
It made me realize that okay, pushing the reading boundaries a bit really can have some good effects.
Yeah. Yeah, I always say it's, it's just got a little hint of magic. It's not, a completely fantasy. I'm actually
Right.
same as you. I'm not a big fantasy reader. And I do think the lesson in here, you could easily switch out that magic potion for a performance enhancing drug. And it could be a totally different book, but absolutely makes sense and be
Yeah.
relevant today.
Yeah.
So
That's a great
that
point.
was definitely my objective there.
Yeah. It's timeless and can cross a lot of boundaries for whoever happens to be reading it of whatever lens they're
Yeah.
through.
Hmm.
So now let's talk about Boy on Hold and Boy
Hmm.
Released.
Hmm.
These books, so I read both of these books faster than I think I've read a lot of other books because I was in
Uh-huh.
it. Like I said,
Uh-huh.
I knew that Price Chopper. I knew that pizza shop. I
Yeah.
in my head imagined where they were living, and it just really sucked me in a way that other books don't because
Yeah.
of that. But then you've got the storyline, this family that you just get
Hmm.
so close to. And at first, I was all about the kids. I was about the little brother,
Mm.
about the big brother, but then I was about the mom, and then it was this.
Hmm.
So many entry points here
Yeah.
on just the hyper local places. So give us the scoop about these books.
Okay. So, well, Boy on Hold, I actually got the idea for this story when we were living in Texas. And my younger son, I'll just, give a little context about the inspiration for the story. My middle son, when he was about 6 years old, he was obsessed with nocturnal animals. He really wanted a hedgehog for a pet, similar to the little boy in the story. And he convinced me, when we were living in Texas, he said, "Can I go outside and go try to catch a hedgehog?" Which, of course, is impossible in Texas.
Right.
But I let him do it because just his innocent mind thought it was possible. And so he had a little flashlight out there and he was looking around the backyard. And I was, of course, watching him from the window, and I realized I could see right into my neighbors' homes. And I got the idea for this book where this young boy sneaks out of the house in the middle of the night and, witnesses a crime. And he's the only one who witnesses it. And his older brother is accused of that crime. So um, I had this story kind of marinating for a long time. And I worked on it for about, I think, a total of 6 years, like, but when I
Wow.
started the book and when I finally published it, of course, taking breaks in between, and the editing process, finding a publisher. But I ended up setting it in upstate New York. Actually, the reason why is because I needed to fact check the legal aspect of the book. And as you probably know, in every state, the law is different. And the process of a trial and all that stuff, there is a trial at the end of the book. There is the legal process is definitely an important one. And I definitely want to do my research and get it right. And so my father happens to be, well, he's retired now, but he was a lawyer here in upstate New York. And so, and I have some lawyer friends. And I said, "Oh, well, I have to set it in upstate New York because that's where my research is going to be, and and it'll make it a valid legal process." So that was the reason I chose to set it. And I chose to set it in Screw Lake because, well, Paradox Lake, how could you not want to set a book in a town called Paradox Lake? I mean, and that was actually the title of the book for a long time, Paradox Lake. And actually Forte's title used to be Loch 12, which is
Oh, it did. That's
it was
fascinating to me, the process of the title and the changing of titles.
yeah,
That's
it's interesting. And the publisher actually said that I needed to change the title of Forte because it was just too regional, and
yeah,
Paradox Lake, I still think that's a cool title because, it doesn't have it has it's symbolic anyway, and just in the
right.
name. So, and I liked the fact that it was, tucked in the Adirondacks a little bit more than, the Lake George area, which is a little bit more urban.
Right.
So, and it just kind of worked for the story to be up north a little bit, but not too far. So I still was familiar with it. And, I still could go up there and do my research. And I did. I went up, and I have a friend who had a place on Paradox Lake. So she'd had me over, and she gave me, her own tour. And my first book reading was at the Screw Lake Library, which was
Oh,
exciting.
wonderful.
So yeah, so that was great. And then I didn't even think I would be doing a sequel to this book until after Boy on Hold was published. And I thought to myself, oh man, I would love to write a sequel to that book because I just loved the characters, and I just had, they were so rich and alive to me. And I actually went to bed one night, and it hit me in the middle of the night. Like I woke up, and it was like a thunderbolt. Like I got the idea from start to finish. I had to get out of bed and journal my idea, like basically was an outline for the whole plot. And that was what became Boy Released. And so in Boy Released, they move from Screw Lake to Lake George, and they run a motel. And being a Lake George High School graduate, I had several friends who owned motels in the surround, because Lake George High School is
It's
smack
right
dab in
there.
the middle of the tourist area, and there are hotels surrounding the school. And so I had several friends who had hotels, and I would help my friends chambermaid, and we would sometimes have sleepovers in the motel rooms. It was just such a normal thing. And
Right.
only when I moved away did I realize that this was unusual. Like not everyone grows up like, helping their friends chambermaid on the weekends, and, having that part of their world. So I was really able to kind of go back into my that, like, those happy memories of, the innocent childhood, when I was there helping my friends with their motel. And then of course as a teenager I would roam those streets on Lake George Village,
Right.
all through the season, all through the year, even when you could, everything was shut down in the winter. And a lot of what Hen does with his buddies, with the pizza, going down to the
Yes.
water, hearing the music, that was all. It was totally taking a page from my teenage years, and that was a lot of fun to write about. Yeah, so that's how Boy Released came to be.
Wow. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that hit you like a thunderbolt in the middle of the night, because when I got the book, I got them as a package deal, and
Hmm.
I wouldn't have felt complete. At the end of the first one, I would have wanted to know what was going to happen. And
Uh-huh.
I didn't have to deal with that because the next book was coming. So I'm
Oh yeah.
very glad to hear that.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, it was, and the fact that it's 10 years later, I think makes it a little bit different as far as sequels go, because, and a lot of people, some people have read Boy Released without having read Boy on Hold, or they read it in a different, reverse order. And it does make sense by itself. It can stand alone.
It
I think
can.
you get more out of it if you read Boy on Hold first, but yeah, it's its own solid story because it takes place so much later.
Right.
And I actually have an outline for a third book, but I
Oh,
haven't written
good.
it.
Yet.
I haven't written it. I haven't written it yet. So,
Haven't written it
but
yet. So the fifth book. So I'm currently reading, and it may not be your fifth book, but it is my fifth book of course.
uh-huh.
And as I kind of alluded to you before we hit record, this one's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. It feels like a departure from these first 4 books. And maybe that's because I am not in the setting. Maybe that's because I kind of came to your books with that expectation. But the plot line, the characters, oh my goodness, the main elements of this book, right from chapter 1 had me in it. Like, and I was joking with you when we were getting ready for this session. I was like, no, not yet. It can't be time, because I still needed to keep reading a little bit.
I love
So
that.
that book is The Secret Cure. And I, as I mentioned to you, and a lot of listeners know, over the past year or so, I've been dealing with my own kind of medical challenges where, I've got joint pain, I've got things that start in my hands and move up my elbows. And I kind of had a mysterious thing for a little while. And so when you first read The Secret Cure, right away in chapter 1, you get to know this character who was dealing with a mysterious illness that started in her hands and moved up to the rest of their body. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I reading? It was just such an instant, I cannot look down. So I would love if you would talk a little bit about The Secret Cure too, because I won't be able to stop talking about it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this was a really cool inspiration story as well. My husband and I were at a destination wedding out in Taormina, Italy, and we were at this resort, and we kept noticing. We noticed throughout the week. We noticed this older man, going back and forth between his mistress on the beach and his handicapped wife at the pool. And his wife had very limited mobility, and it took a while for us to make this connection that the same guy was going back and forth. And as soon as I saw this, I was like, ding, the light bulb went off. And I was like, I have to write this book. Like, this is just too good, So it is a departure. And I actually had to get a completely different publisher to publish that book. And the publisher is called Darkstroke. It's a little darker. It's definitely more adult. There are curse words in it, and so I think it's every publisher I've worked with 3 different publishers. Everyone has their own process, and I have learned so much from each one. And I also did a self-publishing. My very first book was self-published, and I can talk about that if you want. But every experience has educated me, and I'm actually working with a 4th publisher with my newest book that's coming out in the spring, which we can talk about. And that's a completely different process too. Yeah. So anyway, so I started Secret Cure, and I wrote that book. Like, I think it took me a year to write it, but when I was working on it, I was just so excited. Like, it just came out, and I had the characters just came to life like almost instantly. The tricky part about thrillers, and I don't want to say too much because I know you haven't finished it yet, because it is a thriller. It's or a romantic suspense, however you want to call that. The ending is tricky to nail, and I actually wrote 3 different endings for The Secret Cure before I decided on one. And I had one publisher, say, I love the book, but you have to change the ending. So, can you change it and then send it back to us? And I did, and they still didn't want, they still didn't like it, so I had to change it again. So, and they ended up with a different publisher, but it was, with Boy on Hold, Boy Released, with even the Forte books, the ending seemed to just make sense, to me. But because you're looking for, and I just wrote I was a guest blog for a website called Women on Writing, that they asked me to write a blog about how to make effective twists. And it made me really think, like, oh my gosh, it is hard. It's hard to make effective twists, because you don't want people rolling their eyes. You don't want people to have it come out of completely left field. So it has to be reasonable, but it also has to shock the reader, or else it's not a twist. So that took some practice, but hey, I have no qualms admitting that I wrote an ending 3 times because I really am happy with how the ending came out.
Right. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait for it. And actually, I think my mind is reeling a little bit that this was actually based on something that you saw perhaps in real life, which makes it like even
Right. And so in the book, the main character, she's got this condition that temporarily paralyzes her. But I definitely didn't want to. And this was something that a lot of, writing coaches helped me with. They said, you have to be very careful because you don't want to offend anyone. Like this is a serious condition. And, you can't make her be, this, you can't use that to kind of for a different agenda kind of thing.
Right.
I'm gonna try not to give away too much of the book, but it was
Spoilers. Thank
important
you.
for me to make her a strong character. And so her personality is a super strong character. Even if she can't move, you can feel her energy when you read her
Yes.
thoughts and her later on her actions. You're like, whoa, this is a girl I'm not going to mess with, kind of thing. And
Yes.
that was intentional on my part.
Yeah. And you can feel that from that very first
Right.
chapter. So inside my community, we do first chapter Fridays where I read snippets of
Ah.
some of the books that I'm reading. And I had to run to record part of this first chapter because I thought
Oh, good.
they have to hear the first chapter of this book, the way that you set it up, where you don't necessarily tell what's going on. You literally show us what's going on. And by the time you get to the end with that one little line,
Yeah.
she hates them both. I thought, oh my gosh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
wait.
It's a lot of fun. It's a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
So you've talked about a couple of aspects of the writing process, choosing titles and then re-choosing titles, writing books that have never seen the light of day yet, and rewriting endings. And what we originally came on to talk about, although now I want to talk about like six other things, is one part is writing books that are hyper local like this. You've mentioned doing the research and walking around and visiting. I know as a reader, I really appreciate how much it allowed me to get inside the book and I think experience the book differently in a way that if a reader wasn't familiar with the area. And so I'm just wondering from your perspective of what that was like writing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you're asking the question, my mind is kind of going to the book that I'm working on now. And it's actually set in a suburb of Seattle.
Okay.
And this is funny because the thing is, a lot of my books have a Boston reference as well. Like Concerto has a lot of it takes place in Boston, and Secret Cure, they're living in a suburb of Boston, and obviously we lived in Boston, and so I think it's important. And I also have a book coming out in the summer that's set in New York City. Like I definitely want to be like, I couldn't write a book about the Black Mountains in Idaho or whatever. I couldn't set a book there because I've never been. I don't know anything about it. Part of Secret Cure does take place in a resort in Taormina, Italy, and it's totally pulled from my memories of being there. So I feel like that's important, because even if I can't actually physically go there and walk the grounds, I can live in those memories, or I can tap into maybe my aunt who lives in Seattle, like, just fact check me here, like make sure that this can actually happen or does happen or is legit. I think that's important because no one's ever done it, but I would hate for a reader to like write a review. It's like, oh, by the way, she's got this all wrong. This wouldn't happen in this area.
Right. Well, that definitely can't happen, at least in the book that I've read so far. And I think that's what makes me appreciate it so much. But, you as you're talking, I keep thinking, right, we write what we know. And even if it's fiction, pieces of your life end up inside of the books, which I think makes it that much better. Right. It's a part of you. It's like
I know.
A fourth child, a fifth child, a sixth child.
Right. Although when you get further into the Secret Cure, maybe just forget about that.
Okay.
Because you don't want to think that I'm tied to anything that happens.
That's true. I'll tie you to Italy, and the connection will we'll stop there. So is that 2 books coming out in the future?
Yes, I have one coming out in the spring. I think, well, it was slated to come out in March, but we might push it because we haven't done any pre-marketing, pre-launch marketing, and we're still we're deep in the edits, and we haven't done a cover reveal. But that is actually more of a romance, but it does have a little bit of a twist. And it's like a very easy read, like fun, sweet, written for adults, but not erotic in any way. And I actually had this idea that I wanted to try to kind of maybe break into the romance genre as an author, because it's such a popular genre and it's so, you could do well. So I wrote this, and I had this idea, this enemies to lovers kind of romance that happens, and I had so much fun. I wrote the book in 3 months, and I got like 3 offers like right out of the gate with this book, and it was kind of telling to me, like, okay, maybe this is kind of what people want to read. But it's interesting. The publisher I signed with immediately started talking to me about the next book he wanted me to write, which isn't a romance because he read The Secret Cure, and he's like, I think you need to merge those two, do more of the romantic suspense kind of books, because those are the juicy ones that we can dig our teeth into. So I'm working on one of those. And then, and actually the one that's coming out in the summer it's called Hackware, which is completely different. And that's with the same publisher who published Boy on Hold and Boy Released. It's a cyber thriller, and it's based on an actual event that happened. My husband, in the middle of the pandemic, my husband's company was hit with ransomware.
Oh.
And they were asking for like $5 million, and his company actually was able to not pay the ransom and get all their data safe, and put them on new servers and all this. It was pretty technical. And my husband made the comment, he said, it's amazing how similar this computer virus is to the pandemic virus, and I said, oh my gosh, light bulb went off. And I was like, I have to write this book. So it's about this population way in the future. The human population has been cut in half, basically, from a pandemic or something, and half the population are actual droids, like androids, and a computer virus threatens to completely wipe them out. And it's scary because that's like half the human population. So so that's a fun one, and it's very fast paced, and it's definitely a thriller. So that'll be a fun one that's coming out in August. But again, totally different.
Yeah, well, but I'm loving that, right? You have such a wide range of books that can appeal to so many readers, depending on where they want to dip their toes in and go from there.
Yeah, and I have been advised that I should try to write more similar books, because then people kind of know what they're getting when they pick up a book from me. But I don't know. I just feel like I want to go where the inspiration takes me, and I don't want to have to try to fill this like definition of what who I might be. But it does make it a little challenging from a marketing perspective, because I feel like my message is a little bit, it changes with every book I come out with, which is okay.
It is, because from a reader's perspective, you can tell when the author's all in and jazzed up, and just like, you can feel that on the page. And I love the Forte series, the Boy on Hold series, but I am all in The Secret, right? So I love that difference. And it just shows your ability as a writer, but just how many opportunities there are for us as readers to connect with authors in different ways. So I love that you're branching out. I think that's exciting. I think it's inspirational.
Oh, good. I think, well, and I think also most people who read don't just read the same genre either, and so I want to be able to, just like I'm writing books that I would want to read. That's basically what I'm doing. And so maybe I have a lot of company, maybe I don't have as much company as I like.
I bet you'll
But
have.
I like to have come out with books that are, that kind of stay with you, that have some sort of element that you can talk about with somebody. I think that's important. I don't want it to just be a story that you can enjoy and then forget about. I want it to stick with people. So I'm hoping that that happens.
Yeah. Well, the first 5 have. You're on a good roll. So I'm looking forward to these next books that are coming out. It sounds like one might be a good beach read, and one could be a quick the cyber one might be a quick yet scary one to read.
Yeah. Yeah, and the cyber one is it's going to be a 2-book series. So the next one will probably come out next year. So, yeah.
That's good to know in
Yeah,
case I get that full circle ending that I wanted. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. So it has been wonderful chatting with you about all of your books that are here, the books that are coming out. Where can listeners find you so that they can grab them for themselves?
Yeah, well, I have a website. It's just jdspero.com, jdspero.com. And also all my books are on Amazon. That's probably the easiest way to get them. You can get them through Barnes and Noble. Like if you go to the store and ask them to order it for you, or maybe any other indie bookstore too. But probably the easiest way is to get it through Amazon. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can all do that quite easily with one click of a button for most of us. So I do hope that I know that at least one of these books are going to pique their interest, whether it's, the Forte series, The Boy on Hold, or the one that I'm jazzed up about now, Secret Cure. You've got something for every reader. So they'll definitely find something that they can add to their TBR stack.
I hope so. That would be great.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was so great talking with you.
Wasn't that such a great episode? I so enjoyed my conversation with JD, and as you saw, wished we had some more time so I could get some more questions in. I mean, not publishing your first book until 41, how inspiring is that? And knowing where she's getting these ideas from her books, they come from her everyday life, and then she gets to really dive in and explore. I definitely had some writing jealousy there, but a whole lot more of writing inspiration. Now, what I'd love for you to do is to send me your hyperlocal books. I would love to create an alpha box chart. If you're an educator, you know that that's a chart with a letter of the alphabet in each one, and we're going to grab some titles. But I want to create a chart of all 50 states. I would love to have listeners write in about their favorite hyperlocal books. Tell me what they are. Tell me where you live. Tell me the books that really capture the essence of the area. And let's gather together a really big list and represent all 50 states on this document so that if you're in need of some hyperlocal books to really get invested in the reading experience, it'll be easy to do with this resource by your side. So you can send me the books that you recommend on social media and tag me at AfinitoLit. Or, of course, you can head to the show notes at alitlife.com and leave your titles there. I'll start compiling them, and then we'll post it out on social media when we've got all 50 states represented. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for helping me in this new 50-state project, and happy reading. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing lives, like bonus podcast episodes, book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. But one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and no bookish community too. Thanks so much for listening.